I'm Max Burrill, and this is Classic Movie Musts, where every week we break down a classic movie while looking to provide artistic insight and historical context. At the very least, we'll talk about what makes these movies classics. Classic Movie Must releases every Friday, ready to complement your weekend movie viewing plans. Thank you so much for your support on Patreon. In this week's episode, we are going to be discussing Dead End. In this episode, in our feature presentation, Ted Walsh is here to help kickstart a new mini series of sorts on the show. But first, let's get into our opening credits. Our film this week is Dead End, which was directed by William Wyler and was released in 1937. Dead End stars Sylvia Sidney, Joel McCrea, and Humphrey Bogart, and also features Claire Trevor. In the slums of New York, on the East River just below the Queensboro Bridge, wealthy people live in opulent and luxurious apartments because of the picturesque views of the river, while the destitute and poor live nearby in crowded cockroach-infested tenements. At the end of the street is a dock on the East River. To the left are the luxury apartments, and to the right are the slums. The Dead End Kids, led by Tommy Gordon, are a gang of street urchins who are already well on the path to a life of petty crime. Members of the gang, besides Tommy, include Dippy, Angel, Spit, TB, and Milty, the new kid on the block in search of friends. Split is a bit malicious with a cruel streak and initially bullies the newcomer and takes his pocket change. However, Tommy eventually lets Milty join the gang, and he turns out to be both a loyal and generous friend. Tommy's sister Drina dreams of marrying some dashing rich stranger who will save Tommy and her from this miserable life of poverty and help prevent Tommy from growing up to be a mobster like Hugh Babyface Martin, who has returned to the neighborhood to visit his mother and childhood girlfriend. Dave Connell, raised on the same street as Martin, recognizes him and warns him to stay away, but Martin contemptuously ignores him. Dave, a frustrated architect who currently works odd jobs, is Drina's childhood friend. He is having an affair with a rich man's mistress, Kay. Although Dave and Kay love each other, they know they cannot be together because Dave cannot provide Kay with the kind of lifestyle she desires. Meanwhile, the kids lure Philip, a rich kid from the apartments, into a cellar where they beat and rob him. When the boy's father tries to intervene, Tommy winds up stabbing him in the arm. He escapes the police and goes into hiding. Martin is subsequently rejected by his mother, who denounces him as a murderer, and repulsed by his ex-girlfriend Francie, who is now a prostitute and sick. Despondent over the failed visit, he decides to kidnap the rich kid for ransom to make the trip back home worthwhile. Dave sees Martin and his accomplices planning the kidnapping and again warns him to leave. Martin knifes him, and Hunk, his accomplice, pushes him into the river. Managing to pull himself out, Dave pursues the hoodlums, knocking out Hunk and chasing Martin on the rooftops before cornering him on a fire escape. Amid a hail of bullets, he manages to mortally wound Martin, who falls onto the street below. While on the ground, Martin engages oncoming police officers in a firefight, shooting a couple before they open fire and kill him. As the police and a crowd of people gather around Martin's body, the doorman recognizes Spit as being a member of the gang that attacked the rich kid's father and identifies him to Officer Mulligan. Spit exonerates himself by informing the police that the man was cut by Tommy, who has returned to say goodbye to Drina before running away. Meanwhile, Kay approaches Dave, asking him to go away with her, using the reward money that he received for killing Martin. Dave refuses, and Kay returns to the man whom she does not love, but can provide her with financial security. Tommy hears of Spit's betrayal and tries to give him the mark of a squealer, which is a knife wound across the cheek. Before he can do so, Dave intervenes and convinces Tommy to surrender to the police. Dave then offers to use his reward money to pay for Tommy's defense. As Drina, Dave, and Tommy leave with Mulligan, the rest of the Dead End Kids meander off into the night, singing, "If I had the wings of an angel, over these prison walls I would fly." Dead End had a approximate budget of $900,000, which adjusted for inflation is just over $16 million. The film was also nominated for 4 Academy Awards. It was nominated for Best Art Direction, Best Cinematography, Best Supporting Actress for Claire Trevor, and Best Picture. Now, the waters of the East River are calling, and it's time for our feature presentation. Joining us for today's feature presentation, your favorite co-host, Ted Walsh. Ted, how are you today?
Very well indeed, and it's good to be with you.
Well, it's always good to be with you. We've got a number of special things going on in this episode. Obviously, this is the first episode of Classic Movie Must's new Patreon exclusivity. So if you're listening to this, thank you so much for joining our Patreon community. It makes a world of difference. We're happy to have you. And not only that, but we're introducing the brainchild, a little informal series of episodes, the brainchild of Ted Walsh himself. Ted, why don't you go ahead and tell the audience what your idea is for this series of episodes we're going to be doing together?
Max, for a long time, really since I started teaching a cinema studies course, I have increasingly fallen in love with the films of William Wyler and gained a great admiration for the films of Wyler. And I think it's perfectly appropriate to say that one of the great delights that's happened about 15 years ago is that one of my students was his granddaughter, who, as it turns out, had never seen any of her grandfather's films. Her father, David Wyler, who is William Wyler's son, couldn't get her to watch any of them. But she had to watch some of them because they were in my course. And I'll never forget the call I got from David Wyler thanking me for introducing his daughter to her grandfather's films. And the big joy was that she loved his films. She had just assumed all along they would be old and creaky, and she discovered that, as we all do when we look at the films of William Wyler, that were in the hands of a master. He is the most honored in the Oscars of any director, including the Irving Thalberg Award, on top of, I believe, 3 Best Director Oscars, Best Movies. He is the consummate craftsman. He was both famously difficult to work with and a pleasure to work with. Some of the greatest actors, Laurence Olivier, I think most conspicuously, said that if you want to learn how to do film acting, work with William Wyler. That's what you need. That's the guy you need to go to. And of course, Olivier was a great stage actor. So we have here a man who understands drama, who understands where to put the camera, who knows how to work with his cinematographers, who loves to tell stories, but I think this is the most important thing of all. He tailors each movie to the story he's telling. He does not have a particular aesthetic that he is wedded to no matter what. He's not a Stanley Kubrick. I love Stanley Kubrick, don't get me wrong. But Wyler is there to serve the story that he's telling. And today's film that we're going to begin this series with, today's film is a really splendid example of that. And we'll get into that. We'll get into the weeds very soon.
Extremely well said, Ted. I'm very excited about it. So what we're going to be doing logistically for you listeners out there is that Ted and I are committing to do one William Wyler film every month for maybe a year, maybe more. Who knows? There's no shortage of amazing films to talk about in a little series we're going to call Wyler with Walsh. And we're going to have fun getting into these episodes. I'm sure we're going to be tracing some interesting through lines, throughout his work. But as you said already, Ted, and it's one of the facets that always endears me to a director, which is exactly what you're saying. When a director can tailor everything going on in the film to what the film is, to what is being said. As much as we love our auteurs with their distinct styles, I have so much love and respect for the directors who are willing to adapt to whatever a given story needs. And as you said, William Wyler is one of the best at that. And obviously, we've already talked about some of his films. We recently did The Heiress. I know I've done Funny Girl here on the show, but there are any number of more to do. And it's kind of amazing that we haven't done more already, but this will certainly rectify that. I think this little series will propel William Wyler right to the top of our list of most discussed directors. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. And I'm very excited to start it off with Dead End, Ted, because there's something always absolutely fascinating in going back to a movie that was made in 1937, and here we are in 2021, and you realize we are grappling with the same exact issues, and you say, oh my gosh, what very little has changed. For as much as everything has changed, it has stayed the same. And this film just gives us that across the board story wise. And then obviously we're going to get into a expertly crafted movie as well.
You're precisely right. In fact, I was stunned when I returned to this film, which I've been a fan of for a long time, but I hadn't watched it in many years. And so when I returned to it to prepare for this episode, I was floored. For instance, I'll just give you one for instance. When the policeman who is not happy with his gig, wishes he'd studied a trade or didn't have to do it, but at least he didn't have to be working in Harlem. And you go, okay, he's talking about being in the Black community and how that felt then is pretty much how we have to talk about these issues now. And we also realize that you people never tell the cops anything, whatever the relationship between the policeman and those kids and that community, not a whole lot has changed. There's something, this isn't about the men and women themselves. This is really more about the system. And I could go on and on and on of the things that really staggered me when I watched this. Now, Max, I think it's important for us both to acknowledge that this movie is based on one of the most successful, important stage plays of all time. Sidney Kingsley's Dead End was an enormous hit on Broadway, and largely because of the way it was produced by David Belasco. He gave his audiences as realistic a set as anybody had ever seen on Broadway. It's still talked about to this day, complete with dirt, complete. It even had a soundscape. He, in fact, said that he wanted his stage play to feel like a movie. And it's kind of interesting that it actually becomes a movie. And Wyler, in my opinion, does it not one better, but at least one as well, by acknowledging the fact through his use of the set that this is a stage play which I am making into a movie, and yet I'm going to make it a really good movie and you're going to love it. Now, there's one little detail I did love about the stage play, because the kids really just could not be diving into water over and over and over again and then freezing their butts off when they, come out of the water. What they did on Broadway, they jumped into a net and then they were spritzed with oil when they came out, so that it looked like not only that they were wet, but the oil actually took the chill off, because they just had on swimming trunks. So but I love little details like that. So as realistic as the Broadway set was, it did cheat a little bit. Whereas in the movie, hey, they dive into the water, and there you go.
I think, talking about that lineage from the theatrical to the filmic is, it's a great place to start, because you can see so clearly in its structure, in its just absolutely embedding itself in this locale, that theatrical lineage. You can see it as a play, as someone obviously who's never seen it as a play. You can totally envision how it would have been an absolutely engrossing experience. But at the same time, to your point, Wyler still holding on to that and saying, we're not going to leave this little cul-de-sac street. We're going to stay right here, just like you would in a play. But at the same time, understanding what other aspects film can bring to the table that you don't have on, in a theatrical production, and really enhancing the film with those elements. And we're going to get into any number of those things. And I'm curious right off the bat, since we're already talking about it, Ted, Wyler wanted to shoot this film on location in New York City.
Right.
And Samuel Goldwyn said, no way. And in fact, so they built an amazing set, which we see. And Wyler populated his set with trash and debris and all the things that absolutely fit this story. And Samuel Goldwyn couldn't stand it, because here, this is a man who thinks that movies should bring the absolute best of everything to the people. And how dare you put trash on my set? And he fired Wyler for a couple days, and then realized, no, we need Wyler. We got to bring him back, and it's okay. We can put some trash on the set. But I'm curious your thoughts. Would you have rather this movie be shot on location, or does the fact, because Wyler wanted it that way, I don't know. I'm almost glad that they were able to lean into this expressionistic set that it looks so real, but has the elements of filmic reality.
I'm absolutely with you on this. I am so glad it was not shot on location. And first of all, the minute you shoot on location, particularly back in the 30s, you've got a lot of variables that you may not be able to handle as dexterously as you can when you are in fact on a soundstage and you have built the set and you have control. And I think it's imperative that the theatricality of this story be acknowledged. And the fact that we are in this set, which Wyler finds a way for his camera to explore and even to exploit. He discovers the beauty, for example, of some wonderful overhead shots, or some shots from way below looking up. He realizes that, okay, I've got, and I think your word is correct, I've got this expressionistic set, and I'm going to find ways, without being cute, without being overly clever, but I'm going to find ways to find the shadows, find the corridors, find the surprises, find the mixture of light and dark. We do know something about how he lit this set. He wanted some very hard light, and he and Greg Toland, his masterful cinematographer, and by the way, they do 6 films together, which is a lot of films for a director and a cinematographer to be doing together. And we'll talk about those as our episodes move on. But he wanted a harsh light, a strong light, and he even used these things called sun arcs behind the camera to give this kind of light he wanted. He did not want a friendly light. He wanted it to be, again, expressionistic. And some of the marvelous times when people are moving through this set, when you get shadows across their faces. And let's face it, the minute you get William Wyler near a staircase, he is a happy man. We're going to be talking a lot about staircases.
Some of his best staircase work is in this movie.
Oh, I know. And that wonderful scene where Kay goes to find him and then is simply freaked out by the reality of what the slums are like. And the Joel McCrea character sees that and discovers a truth that he really does need to discover.
You're absolutely right. And to me, it's what you're saying, that you could not, so much of what makes this movie just absolutely eye-catching is the cinematography. And you could not achieve this shadow work, this light work on a real life New York City street. It would have been fascinating to see what New York City looked like in 1937 in this kind of an environment, because we don't really get to see that much of it. But you would not get this light, the absolute amazing lighting work. I mean, let alone the first shot in the movie, which goes from this, the background into, this prop set into the real set. It's able to just work so perfectly and set up its themes so early on. The early shot where we have Drina in her apartment, and you get her and the light coming from this lavish apartment building across the way. You get these perfect angles, these perfect moments that perfectly set up the themes and the tension that exists in this movie. You can capture that on in a particularly expertly composed shots in a way that you simply cannot necessarily in real life, because buildings aren't exactly where you want them to be.
And the abiding metaphor that's in the title, Dead End, you feel that with such force because you are on a set, because you can see the beginning, middle, and an end of that set. By the way, if anybody's curious, if you wanted to have shot it on location, you would have been at 53rd and the East River, if in the actual location. And speaking of the play, just a little side note, about 10 years ago, I think it was, there was a splendid revival of this on Broadway, and then it actually moved out here to Los Angeles. And it was a very, very effective production, but I would have given everything to have seen the David Belasco production, because, as I said, it is a set that is still talked about to this day as being one of the most realistic sets ever generated on Broadway. And here's a really interesting thing for us to think about, Max. For Broadway, the set is considered brilliantly realistic. For the movies, we talk about it as not realistic because it's not on location, if you see what I'm saying. So those terms mean a different thing whether you're in a theater or whether you're in a movie. But to repeat, thank God this movie was not shot on location.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And you've touched on something that struck me rewatching this film, because it kind of hit me. Obviously, you can see it very much in the themes of the story, but you take a step further back, and there is something about it on the macro level as well. This theme of falsity, of simulation, that I find very thought provoking as you go through the film. The class tension is so apparently evident, but the way so many characters throughout the film are pretending to be something they are not. But you take that step back, and this film is playing with that same anxiety, that same tension within its very self. It is pretending to present the social problem as it is on the streets of New York City, but it isn't. It is the Hollywood production and all of the value systems that get wrapped up in that. And so at its very core, a story aside, this film is grappling with its own tension of being something it's not quite, and dealing with that sense of performance.
And because of Joseph Breen and the code and whatnot, they cleaned up a lot in the play. They changed a good many things. They sanitized some of the language. The character that Joel McCrea plays is greatly changed. And we're not going to get into the weeds of all that, because I think we have to take the film on its own terms. And what you said also brings me to want to talk about the Dead End Kids, because the Dead End Kids, this is their first movie. And I don't think it was ever assumed that there would be others, but as it turns out, they became a really significant force in the movies of the 30s and 40s. I grew up, when I was in the 40s, I was watching Dead End Kids movies. They were a force unto themselves. They were a character group unto themselves. Except for Leo Gorcery, they are all teenagers at the time of this movie. And what I love in this film is that they do have agency in the storytelling, but they're almost more like a Greek chorus.
Totally.
We keep returning to them, and they get to comment on the action. We get that very compelling thing that we know the babyface Martin at one point was just like one of these kids, but then things got bad, or he went from not so good to worse. How easy it is to go from being a mischief-making kid to somebody who's a lot worse. and then the really beautifully told story about Drina and Tommy, her brother. That story is very effectively told, I think, even though I'm told, or I've read somewhere, that Sylvia Sidney did not like working with William Wyler. He She found him too tough. We should say right off the bat, one of William Wyler's nicknames is 40 Take Wyler, because he is famous for doing take after take after take. And he would often say, which I love, to his actors, they would say, "Well, what are you looking for?" And he says, "Just do it again." He would never actually say what he was looking for, but when he saw it, he knew he got it. And this is why, after the fact, so many actors say that he taught them something about being honest in front of the camera. And when he saw that honesty, that's what he went with. He's not one of those 40 take, 70 take people that seem to just do that to be sadistic and then end up doing the second take. He went until he got what he wanted, and then that's the take he used.
Yeah, too many stories result in him using the 40th take for us not to say that, you know, there wasn't a truth in that process. And you can see almost how, without directing his actors, he giving them the space to continue to explore their characters and find new depths take after take, leading the emotion so it feels organic to the performance without them trying to meet his need. You know, it's a fascinating tightrope of, you know, psychology and reverse psychology, but you can't argue with the results. You mentioned these kids right off the early in the story, and they are so great. I love your comment about the Greek chorus, because they are so clearly the Greek chorus, but also having their own distinct narrative arc, their own drama that evolves. And you absolutely, you see from the very beginning how these kids are destined to become like Babyface Martin, how they are on this path, and the path doesn't really lead anywhere else. What other choice do they have? And so their ability to kind of be distanced from the action, but also still be totally embedded in the action, makes for a great dynamic. And, you know, again, that these kids already from a young age are trained to act tougher than they are. They are performing their toughness. Not to say they aren't tough and that they aren't dealing with horrible circumstances, but it is a performance. And you see that in all the characters along the way, right up until Babyface himself, who has literally changed his physical appearance for the sake of seeming different than he is. It's quite taken to its extreme that he is, beyond changing how you act, beyond changing everything. Eventually you go right up to plastic surgery, having to change exactly how you look. But you can change all those things, and it doesn't mean you aren't drawn right back to where you came from, seeking connections that were lost, that were not outside that street that you tried hard to get away from. And that's its own heartbreaking tale.
And those kids, they look authentic. They do not look like young would-be movie stars. They have hardscrabble faces. They are not cute. They just feel authentic. And Wyler loved working with them. He gave them a lot more latitude than he gave some of his professional actors or more experienced actors. He let them improvise, and he found that they were good improvisers. So some of what we are actually hearing in the story is a result of Wyler giving them some freedom. But speaking of Wyler and working with actors, there are these two scenes in the movie where you see the master at work with actors who are masters. And they are the scene between Babyface and his mother, and Babyface and Franny, his old girlfriend. They're astonishing performances. The restraint that Marjorie Main brings to her performance as the mother breaks my heart. And we know, because there are a lot of Marjorie Main movies out there, that when Marjorie Main wants to chew the scenery, she can chew the scenery. Uh, uh, she can go big. I mean, she isn't Ma Kettle for anything, but she says so simple, so quiet, so focused, that scene kills me. And then you see how much she's holding in when he dies, and you hear her scream, and
Yeah.
you know that just takes it away. But then the scene I really want to talk about is uh, the brilliant Claire Trevor. She won an Oscar, I believe, for this. She
I
got
think she was
nominated,
just
nominated,
nominated.
just
Yeah.
nominated. I never remember who was nominated or won, nor do I care, to tell you the truth. Uh, she she's terrific in this. I just want to say one thing to Babyface, and that is this: you fault her for becoming a sex worker, and she's not good enough for you, who are a common murderous criminal. Give me a break. When he says to her, well, couldn't you get a job? I want to, I actually want to hurt him. And I think that says a lot about the values of the time and the way women were viewed. Uh, there's a marvelous moment where I think Tommy says to Drina, oh, but you couldn't get away with that because you're a girl. It that there's a whole way of looking at this from a feminist point of view, which I think is kind of interesting. And the fact that Drina is she is a protester. She got hurt by the cops. But I just want I really that scene with Claire Trevor, brilliantly acted. Also want to say to Babyface, why did it take you so long to realize that she is now a sex worker? Why did it take you? You are an experienced guy, but I guess you're only seeing her as the girlfriend from your youth. So
Yeah, I mean he's totally blinded by these two desires to connect with his mother and to connect with his first love. And I mean, to your point, obviously the scene with Marjorie Main, amazing. Another staircase scene, and the restraint in her performance is so powerful. And then you go the other direction. Instead of going up the stairs with Marjorie, we go down the stairs with Francie, or with Claire Trevor. And I mean, the line that is the gut punch of the film to me is, "Why didn't you starve?" To which she, of course, replies, "Why didn't you?"
yeah,
And that is exactly the hypocrisy that he is showing her. Also, to note, he's just been devastated by his mother for not offering him the unconditional love he feels he deserves because of the life choices he has made, and then promptly does the exact same thing to Francie, completely shunning her for the life choices she's made to survive. And for some reason, in his mind, what she's done is different than what he's done. And then that hypocrisy, of course, evident in the through lines of the film itself, that we look, the way in which we look down on Francie, through Babyface. I mean, that scene when she, casts herself into the light, which, is just, again, a moment that only Greg Toland can bring you, as she's now bathed in what looks to be, a spotlight. And conversely, we don't seem to have any of the same judgment for Kay, who does the exact same thing, in that she is a kept woman, but she does it the other direction, up the social ladder, and there's no judgment there.
right.
And at the same time, Francie is left to, essentially, probably not long for this world, much further, as she's clearly sick, and there's never a stray cough in a movie. It's never an accidental cough. If someone
I want
coughing, they're gonna go.
I'm dying for the movie sometime where the prostitute does not have consumption or tuberculosis. It just seems to be, but it's just inevitable. I mean, there are a lot of very familiar tropes in that scene, but again, we watch the masters at work, and you're so right about the revelatory moment when Toland bathes her in that light, and we have that moment. And I love your point about Kay. I love, first of all, Kay enrages me. I have very little affection or admiration for Kay. She but your point is well taken, and you take these three women or four, adding Drina if you want. You got the mom, the hooker, Drina, and Kay, and you look at ideas about women and how they are going to succeed or not to succeed at that time. Some things have changed and some things haven't changed. And finally, I just have to add, Babyface, could you not have given her just one more 20? You have, I don't know how many 20s you got there, but you got a lot of 20s. And couldn't you at least, she wanted a kiss? Nope. She just puts her cheek against your lips, but you didn't return a thing. You are a SOB. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean that moment always strikes me in the sense that it in the interaction she's just had, and she's acknowledging the dreams of her youth. I think the first time I saw it struck me as being out of character in that moment when she says, "Hey, can I just have $20 more?" But it's already in this moment, she already feels shot down. The dreams of her youth are gone, and she is back into the mode of her reality. And that is to say, hey, can you slip me an extra $20?
And I need that
And
20. I need that 20.
she needs the 20. And like that, I mean, in the blink of an eye, those dreams are, she didn't ask for those dreams to come back. They did. And now they are ripped from her again. And it's particularly heartbreaking. And it's just, again, here's a woman who has kind of suppressed her performance. We see a glimpse of who she is. She's performing on the streets every day, trying to keep a stiff upper lip, so to speak. The performances that each of these characters are putting forth, Kay performing for whatever her rich boyfriend to his needs, Kay performing in her way. Everyone is pretending to be something they're not. Even, of course, after Babyface is, just had both of his two avenues for hope shot down. He goes into the restaurant with the restaurateur who's pretending to be a classier restaurant than he is, and who turns off his false playing piano because it irritates, these two glum men with its happy music. I mean, it's just, there's so many things, layer after layer of thematic depth of just things with wrapped up in a totally false exterior. It's just, again, speaks to the depth of this film.
The I don't know what I call the smart money, but one reads in more places than I would like to have it said that this film feels dated and set bound. I disagree fervently with both. To the extent that the film is dated, it is dated in the most interesting way, telling us, as you started this off, how little has changed, not how much has changed.
Absolutely.
And the other is that to the extent that it feels set bound, that is part of the aesthetic of this film. That is, we are going to, if we are bound by this set, we're going to explore every nook and cranny of it and exploit it to the advantage of telling this very compelling story. And we're going to keep it simple. We're not going to over articulate anything about this. We've got good actors. We've got a solid cinematographer. We got a guy who knows how to tell a story. Even though this is fairly early on in his career, well, he made films in the 20s, did a lot of silence, and then in the 30s starts to catch stride, and then he goes 40s, 50s, 60s. And by the way, Max, looking ahead, just think about this to our listeners. Think about the difference between Dead End and Ben-Hur. Now, if that isn't a guy who doesn't know how to tell the story that is suited to the story that you're telling, then I don't know what is. Those are polar opposites of the way that Wyler thinks. He said this. He said it to Toland, and I think Toland said it about him. No matter when they made a movie together, first thing they did is they sat down and they said to themselves, what is the look that we want what's the look and the feel that we want for this story. And if it's a story like these three, for example, then that's essentially a feminine story, and there's a look that we want for that. If it's dead end, then we want these harsh shadows. We want this chiaroscuro. We know what we're after before we start work.
Yeah.
How liberating is that?
Absolutely. And to your point about the film, a criticism being it feeling set bound, the film, it thrives off its assumption that what the rest of New York City looks like, but you are stuck here. You are at the dead end, right? I mean, that is the point of how these people have no means. The wealthy go off in their cars. And of course, just the conceit, of course, that the front entrance is broken because that street is being paved or whatever. So they have to use this service entrance for a week. That you're just getting this snapshot into a week in time where these worlds are colliding in a way that they wouldn't normally otherwise. But of course, they've already collided, as with this, you have this, lavish building drop down right in the middle of this tenement project. And of course, the film being a social problem film, it shows you very clearly, the American dream being wrapped up in social mobility does not exist in this circumstance. The only way out of this dead end is through crime. And we see where that leads to with Babyface Martin. He might have that $150 shirt or $120 shirt, whatever it is, but does no good if it's full of bullet holes. And there is no other path. And we see obviously then how it's extended down to young Tommy, who's going to be going down that same road.
I do love the fact that they can't get out the front door of the fancy building, that at least for a week, they too are bound in their circumstances and have to face alternative circumstances as they go and come. It's by the way, that building has, I believe, some historical accuracy to it, that there was, I think it was called River House, I'm not sure, but there was a conspicuously a nice building plopped down in the middle of the tenement. It's called gentrification on steroids. Yeah.
Well, it's the same, exactly the same issues that we're dealing with today. And the one you mentioned, those scenes with the police officer earlier on, the one strikes me as well is her saying, I was protesting and a police officer beat me in the head. And I mean, again, it doesn't take the most observant person in the world to draw the connections to our current day and age. Now, before we move on to some of just a few particular scenes with just the lighting that we have been talking about, I'd be remiss if I also didn't mention the most heartbreaking of performances of people performing a reality that is not their own. When Dreena's story of having met this wealthy man and she's telling this story knitting under this dock bridge with no light in her life whatsoever. And we're listening to it saying, is this real? Is this why, or was this why she was late the first night as we were here? No. And she cannot perform it as completely as everyone else can perform their reality. She can say, I can go through the motions, but it's not real.
No,
it's not real. I made up this story years ago. And it's so heartbreaking.
And Sylvia Sidney can say all she wants to about either liking or not liking working with William Wyler, but boy, that is a performance. She's incredibly effective in that very moment. She's effective throughout the movie, but that very moment, which is that's a tight line to walk as an actor, and she walks it beautifully. And it's got to be Wyler. I mean, he's the guy watching it.
Yeah. And then, we mentioned it at the beginning. It's worth returning to now, giving it its proper due. But those scenes in which Wyler and Gregg Toland show this dead end for its ugly side. And it is the scene in which Kay, ascends the stairs and is repulsed, is scared. It is a Wyler staircase scene par excellence, as in the moment when he sees her, and then you have that downward shot and him hiding in the shadows. I mean, it's so well done. And then I think that the best other moment where we really see the darkness of this this reality. We see it through her eyes, and we realize that this relationship cannot be. And then we see it towards the end when Babyface and his criminal cohorts are going through it. I mean, the scene when Humphrey Bogart is walking beneath a escape ladder, and you just have those, it's noir Venetian blinds just cutting across his whole body. And then right up into his death, which I believe is a kind of a non-factor in the play. I mean, it's not a momentous scene, but I mean, the shootout sequence, again, just showing you Wyler saying, well, let's bring the tools of film to bear, and we're going to give you, a rooftop death scene to rival the best of the gangster genre.
Absolutely. And right before that whole, in that very, after Bogart has kicked open the door to whatever that is, and we are in those very murky surroundings, we can hardly tell who's where or what's going on. That's movies at their best. And, that camera gets very involved. It feels almost like handheld moments there that are surprising for 1937. But again, it's those shadows. It's that chiaroscuro. It is the noir times 10 that is used so effectively in this film. And there you have Bogart. Bogart. He plays these roles. He belongs in these movies. He's so magnetic no matter what he's doing. There are moments in the movie when I want to say, don't you see that's Humphrey Bogart over there just kind of standing around in his suit and tie and his hat? And I realized, no, that's, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And, it builds to, as many social problem films do, it builds towards this cynical, ironic ending. I mean, we have our young Greek chorus singing their way off, but it's a song about escaping from prison. And we realize these boys are never going to escape from this prison. And so while we're left in this slightly uplifted mood that we understand that the couple is going to be reunited, Tommy will probably get, off the hook. But nothing's going to change here. So it leaves you with that ambiguity that only would be anything else would be false.
The only thing is commercial, and that is that the Dead End Kids are going to have a movie career, and so they do. So that's in some movies that are far less aesthetically interesting than this movie. But God bless them. They had fun doing it. They became a significant little force in movies after this. Give them the credit where credit is due.
And they're a fun part of this movie, and
Absolutely.
the film wouldn't work without them. So.
Oh no! In fact, I look forward to those. They're like a Greek chorus, as I say. You look forward to a return to them. You know that they are the thread of this particular story, and they're going to get a little involved, but not significantly involved, with the exception of Tommy, who is really also not really part of them in some ways. So. Anyway, you know what I'm saying.
I do. Ted, I mean, I think I'm so excited to delve into all these Wyler films. I think this was such a great one to start with because, this film directed by a premier director, it got 4 Academy Award nominations, but it's one of the many, many films that you just say, this is a product of the studio system in that it is exceptionally well crafted, but it was the next in line and they would move on to another. And in many ways, it's not forgotten, but it's not, I don't think it's given its due either. This is a extremely powerful film that is enhanced by how it was made, by the people who made it, that speaks to 1937 as well as it speaks to 2021. And there's always something quite profound in that formula for films.
Hear, hear. Thank you, Max.
Thank you, Ted. That concludes our episode on Dead End. I'd love to hear what you think of this classic movie must. Feel free to tweet at me at MovieMustsPod, email me at classicmoviemusts@gmail.com, or DM me on Patreon. Thank you to our Patreon producers, Eleanor B., Max Henri, Pedro R., Ryan D., Jonathan, Bernie, Stephen Schofield, John Kelvey, Roger Blackburn, Bonnie Robinson, David Wasserman, Sarah Shaw, Bill Ryan, Maura McPeak, Shane Karshen, Lance Whitney, and Lana Quakenbush. Remember, episodes release every Friday on Patreon, as well as the podcast service of your choosing. On next week's episode, we are discussing The Quiet Man. Thank you so much for your support and for listening. And until the next episode, keep up with your classics.